Fourth day, lower water month, 0C. It took Davy 2 days to liquidate her remaining inventory for a satisfactory amount. Without cargo to ship, however, their journey down the Rolengork was swift. It took a week and a half to paddle the 800 kilometers downriver to the border of the Draconic Kingdom with limited stops in the cities along the way. Ranadratha's criers were present at each city, providing updates on the War Master's progress in the human nation to the west. Each conveyed a tale of spectacular success. Since their time on the Yorgland front, 4 more cities had fallen and the Beastmen were said to be in complete control of the countryside. The plunder that made it to the cities served as proof of their conquest, though the lack of detailed information from any source annoyed Soraka more than a bit. The criers knew what they were doing, however, the masses cared little for details. The parts that mattered to them were those that affirmed Rolengork's superiority and the wealth that it would bring. I wonder what a platinum trade coin can buy me in the Draconic Kingdom. We don't know for sure yet. Oh, give it up. All signs point to it. You've been avoiding asking directly, too. Soraka sighed. Most places in the world with carnivorous populations accepted the fact that humans could be consumed. If one asked Soraka if the Beastman Confederacy viewed humans as food, he could only truthfully answer yes. But that answer defined little and left too much to the imagination. It wasn't that humans were specifically targeted, it was just that meat was meat. The same way a goblin was meat. Or a beastman. Unless they were tainted in some way, it would be a waste to dump them in a hole or burn them or whatever inefficient practices some societies partook in. Some places fed the remains of their citizens to livestock to create an additional degree of separation, or processed them into fertilizer by using slimes or other decomposers, but the fact remained that they made efficient use of their people in the end. At the same time, humans were terrible livestock. There were any number of better things to raise for the purposes of consumption. Nook, Nug and other related species were good examples. They were easy to raise, efficiently processed cheap fodder and grew to be 24 times more massive than the average human. On top of that, humanoid species had an easier time doing certain things than many demi-humans and heteromorphs. The only aspect that they were generally lacking compared to most other races was their physical power, making them a poor choice for heavy labor and roles such as heavy infantry. Even so, there were humanoid groups that specialized in warfare and were able to remain competitive in their respective niches. No matter where it was in the world or who was involved, economics eventually dictated how various species were ultimately treated. The problem was that those realizations and the resulting societal developments took time. The fact that raw power was, by and large, the determining factor for how interspecies relationships worked in the uncivilized parts of the world made it difficult for any progress on that front to be made. How humanoids were treated varied from place to place. There were some places, like the Troll Empire, where they were still considered livestock. Of course, the trolls did that to every race that they could capture, and the only races who truly tolerated them were races that were used to being eaten, plus some other giantkin. In the Minos League's sphere of influence, humans had transitioned to a mostly slave population, but it was weird being a Minotaur slave. Unlike most countries, the Minotaurs specifically elevated their human population to slave status due to the influence of the Great Guru that appeared 2 centuries previous. All of the other livestock remain livestock. Humanoids were simply a handful out of the hundreds of member races in the Beastman Confederacy. Humanoid citizens had the same rights as citizens of any other race. Humanoid slaves had the same rights as slaves of any other race. They could vote on guild issues, assume positions of leadership, work in the bureaucracy or compete in whatever profession they wished. One's race did not impact how one's contributions to society were weighed. Furthermore, humanoids were afforded the same right of travel as any other race in most parts of the world, so long as they observed the local laws. Human children who looked lost or alone were more likely to be fretted over out of concern for their safety rather than be seen as a convenient snack. "Shork," he asked, "how do you feel about humans?" "I've never seen a human before," Shork answered. "But they're not poisonous, so I guess you can at least eat them." Soraka released a sigh. Never mind feral humans, he was in a country full of near-feral beastmen. Though he had settled on that conclusion, the western regions of Rolengork did show signs of technological and cultural advancement that the rest of the country had not. The infrastructure was better and the civilian population had grasped certain concepts that were unknown further upriver. He wasn't sure if it was due to being exposed to the Draconic Kingdom, so he was curious to see how far the human country had come. The curios flowing upstream suggested that they were nothing like a civilization that had to start from scratch because of the demon gods. Of course, this also gave rise to questions as to why that was, and it seemed that he would only be able to find his answers by taking a personal look. They passed through the wide, overgrown canyon that Davy's trade maps marked as the border of Rolengork. Beyond that, the role of Vellum portrayed nothing. Traffic on the river was plentiful enough, however, and their vessel slowed to join the long procession of barges heading through the narrowing river. "I wonder why everyone's been so closed-mouthed about what lies west," Karabaki asked from the seat ahead of him. "Merchants would be the vast majority of those going back and forth," Davy answered from beside her, "and it's a new market. They'd naturally try to monopolize what they can, and they have no obligation to share what they know. They'll only tell you something if they think it will raise the value of their goods, so that information can't even be treated as trustworthy for our work. Migrants won't come back this way, obviously, and military types are usually all hush-hush unless they're bragging about something." "I think the military types you mentioned are in the same boat as the migrants," Soraka said. "Ranadratha uprooted his entire clan to lay claim to his conquests. Aside from a few security contractors, the bulk of the military forces in the Draconic Kingdom are subjects of Ranadratha." "That guy really went all in," Jiraka said as he watched a small herd of goats picking their way over the canyon walls. "Well, so far his gamble seems to be paying off," Soraka said. "I look forward to speaking with him." Ranadratha led one of Rolengork's western warrior clans, so he was keen to see if he differed substantially from the eastern lords. They exited the western side of the canyon, and though the river widened once again, the flow of traffic slowed to a crawl. Soraka frowned and stood in his seat. On the horizon, silhouetted against the evening sun, was a huge fortress fashioned out of the same granite that made up the canyon walls. Humanoid city, well, human city, obviously. Needless to say, they're not used to receiving so much traffic from upriver. No banners flew from the battlements, nor were they manned by any human defenders. Soraka looked to his right at the barge beside them. "What's this city called?" he asked a female bar who he caught staring at him. The humans call it Eastwatch," she answered. "That's what we're using until they come up with something more appropriate." It already sounded appropriate to him. It was the fortress that guarded the eastern gates of the Draconic Kingdom. Thus, Eastwatch. It was a practical sense of naming employed the world round. "Call me crazy," Jiraka said, "but I sorta miss traffic jams. We haven't been stuck in one since the other end of the Sapphire Coast." The source of the delay, as Soraka had suspected, was a port that was far too small to handle all of the ships coming from Rolengork. Eastwatch's infrastructure could only service about 3 dozen vessels, and the wharf was crammed with people and cargo. The sun had already fallen below the horizon by the time they'd disembarked. "I don't think they're going to let us moor our ship there," Soraka said. "Try to find a place downstream." Kasturi and a few other members of his house guard took their barge and slowly made their way out of the snarl of river traffic. Soraka took a deep lungful of air, sorting out the myriad of new scents. While the smell of human habitation was everywhere, it was old. Bar warriors maintained order and migrants from Rolengork gawked at the surroundings until officials came to address them. He didn't see any of the Draconic Kingdom's citizens around the wharf, captured or otherwise. "It's bigger than any of the clanholds in Kostorofi Keral." Shork peeked out from behind him. "Did the humans really build something like this?" "It's not exactly a clanhold," Soraka said, "but yes. Most of the human city should be behind those walls." They would likely be able to make sense of everything they saw in the Draconic Kingdom, but Shork's question reminded them that the migrating beastmen from Rolengork probably wouldn't be so knowledgeable. The technological difference between the two sides, however, was evidently insufficient to make up for the gap in raw power between their races. "They sure didn't delay any changing this place up," Jiraka said as they passed through the wharf gate. "This feels weird," Mitra said. "It's as if all of the humans were swapped out with beastmen, but it's still human everything." Everything was either too cramped or too spacious. The buildings were sized for humans, but the wide lanes and lack of trees made the streets and plazas feel exposed. Saplings and shrubs had been transplanted to address the latter, but it would take decades to transform the city as the mystics of Rolengork didn't know any magic that influenced the growth of plants. Karavaki pulled on his left elbow. He stopped to see what had drawn his wife's attention. A small courtyard could be seen halfway down a side street. A temple, huh? Soraka said as they looked in through a fence of cast iron bars. Did they repurpose it? If I have it right, the first 3 cities were occupied nearly half a year ago. Information took a long time to spread in Rolengork. By the time Gorlia had received word of Ranadratha's achievement in the Draconic Kingdom, months had already passed. Traveling in the direction of the news made it seem like the War Master was advancing at an insane rate. Something else is going on here, Karavaki said. If they had repurposed it, the local iconography would be replaced with something familiar to the new residents. This building is undamaged and well maintained. Maybe it's a clan estate, Soraka offered. Temples are generally more spacious and the civilian lords seem to have a taste for the trappings of wealth. Karavaki entered the grounds without a response. Halfway to the temple's main colonnade, a bar mystic appeared from within the building. "Welcome to the Temple of Storms," she said. "Is there something I can help you with?" "We've just recently arrived," Karavaki told the mystic. "I couldn't help but notice this temple. When you say the Temple of Storms, do you mean to say that this is a temple of Iskar and Vila?" "Yes, that's right," the mystic replied. Many newcomers express the same confusion, but a god is a god. The humans also worship the Lord of Storms and the Lady of the Waves. In that case, Karavaki asked, would it not anger the gods that their followers are killing one another? The storms and floods take all equally. They do not hesitate to wash away those preying on the riverbank. I see. In that case, we should pay our respects before moving on. We have a long journey ahead of us. Gods were worshipped for different reasons, often out of the desire to placate or petition powers beyond the control of the individual. Nature gods were often associated with the wrath that the elements could bring. They were more feared than they were venerated, though it did depend on how local religions incorporated them into daily life. They went over to a side chapel, which was softly illuminated with blue magical lighting. An ephemeral, human-like figure carved out of white marble stood within, dressed in flowing cloth. She wore a serene expression as she played the lyre in her hands. As with the rest of the temple, the statue was fastidiously maintained. Offerings lay on the floor around it, nearly obscuring the script at the base. Wrathful elements aside, Vila was considered the personification of the Rolengork, the mother of all life in the primitive beastman society. Mitra's voice rose softly in song. She translated the inscription aloud. Vila, eternal mistress of crystalline waters. They got the name right, at least. What do you think, Karavaki? I think we should take a look at the other temples here, Karavaki replied. Since the humans of the Draconic Kingdom have a writing system, we should be able to get a good idea of their spiritual lives from looking at temple frescoes and such. They lingered at the Temple of Storms for another half hour, making what they could out of what they saw. The presiding mystic unsurprisingly wouldn't let them into the temple's administrative offices, so they weren't able to take a look at any of its records. As they continued down the row, they found that not all of the temples in Eastwatch were in such good condition. Those whose gods were not shared by the migrants from Rolengork were looted and repurposed into makeshift estates for prominent individuals. Of the ones that remained unscathed was predictably a temple to the 4 elements, which were referred to as the 4 great gods by the humans. Another temple was something of a curiosity. A god of life and a god of death had been attached to the ubiquitous elemental pantheon and rebranded as the 6 great gods. The temple was heavily human-centric, to the point where one might consider it a temple for humans rather than a temple of the gods. As the 2 extra gods were unfamiliar to the migrants, their representations, icons and art had been looted or defaced much like the other temples of other unfamiliar faiths. Many of those faiths seemed familiar to Soraka and his entourage, however. They had likely trickled in from the rest of the continent over time. It seems like the Draconic Kingdom is far better connected to the rest of the world than Rolengork, Soraka said. Not that any of those connections help them, Jiraka snorted. Since they're on the coast, Davy said, it was likely merchant traffic and individuals traveling with those merchants spreading ideas. This goes a long way in explaining the stark technological differences between the Draconic Kingdom and Rolengork. Staying connected to the world at large was instrumental in recovering from calamitous cycles. A region might be devastated by some natural disaster, a godlike being, or a dearth of monsters, but the way that major civilizations spread their merchant networks meant that a devastated region was a region ready for exploitation that wasn't possible previously. A society so connected would quickly get back up again, even if everything was destroyed. The question was which civilization it was. If the Draconic Kingdom was part of the Cerulean Way, then the most likely answer would be the Sapphire Coast. Another possibility was that, since the walled spine ended somewhere nearby, they were influenced by the overland trading empires that plied the Great Northern Steppe. The latter was a concerning thought, as it meant that the hegemony of the Minos League, the great empire of the Minotaurs next to the Beastman Confederacy, had already touched the lands beyond. "Keep an eye out for any Minotaur technology," Soraka said. I suppose the walled spine is no longer an obstacle past here," Davy said, "but the people in Rolengork have no idea what a Minotaur is. It's unlikely that Minos has any direct influence in the Draconic Kingdom." They left the temples with some questions answered, but many new ones to think about it. At least those questions were more relevant to the world that they knew compared to what rose from the state of near isolation in Rolengork. "Looking around is fine and all," Jiraka said, "but where are we staying tonight?" "We're in a city," Soraka said, "so there should be plenty of inns, no? Think they know what a human inn looks like? Or care that it's an inn at all?" Soraka sighed. Given the structure of humanoid inns, which looked nothing at all like inns in Rolengork, one would likely be turned into a barracks or claimed as a tribal holding by the local beastmen. Strange things happened when one set of conventions collided with another. It could be amusing to see as a bystander, but it was also inconvenient if one was looking to take advantage of one thing or another. Following the common logic of humanoid settlements, Soraka made his way through the streets of the city to its administrative center. Eastwatch's layout grew more spacious and the buildings grandiose. The settled beastman population seemed to have picked up on that, and he noted a higher percentage of tribal chieftains and well-to-do citizens in the area. His attention crossed over the new residents, focusing on the city itself. "It looks like the Draconic Kingdom is tribal as well," he said. "Everything about this city speaks of a stratified society ruled by the elite. The structure of that society is still about one stage more advanced than Rolengork," Karawaki said. "That should be expected of humanoids," Soraka replied. "Since their races are highly flexible, they tend to optimize faster." "Are you saying that these humans are better than us?" Shork asked. "In certain aspects," Soraka answered, "they certainly are. The problem is that humans have shortfalls that are difficult to make up for. Raw, individual power, for instance. An average beastman civilian is far stronger than an average human civilian. If a human country is poorly developed on the martial end of things, the average beastman civilian may even be stronger than the average human warrior. Meaning that the sheer number of migrants alone is likely a huge problem for the Draconic Kingdom," Karawaki said. "Humans can't use civilians as fighting power like beastmen can, not that you should. Going by what we've seen so far, the Draconic Kingdom might have had the economy to support a standing army comprising 1% of its population. If they had 10 million people, that's an army of 100,000. If you throw 250,000 beastman migrants at it with more coming every month, that army wouldn't be able to hold out." "Not necessarily," Soraka said. "It depends on the state of the army. Since Rolengork uses a military paradigm that revolves around the use of warbands, a good, professional humanoid army should be able to deal with it. If the Draconic Kingdom incorporates strong individuals into their armed forces, and I don't see why they wouldn't, given their situation, I dare say that it would be easy." "Well, that obviously didn't happen here," Jiraka said. "All those criers announce steady progress on this front. The humans are getting their asses eaten. The Draconic Kingdom's problem is probably Ranadratha. If he's using his clan to support the migration, Soraka absently observed the beastmen in the city's administrative district as he reviewed what the new sites in the Draconic Kingdom might mean for the bigger picture. One could say that the area being filled with elites should be expected, but the population of the city in general had a certain purposeful order to it. "Mitra," he said. "What's the most detail you've ever heard those criers across Rolengork go into?" "Not much, really," Mitra replied. "The message that they deliver needs to be simple and attractive enough to stick. Going into detail would distract from the purpose and give people things to deliberate over." So nothing specific about battles, the state of the migrants or the way things are organized here? The Sharon fell silent, tapping her chin with a claw. Not a single bit of information along those lines, she replied after a moment. The closest thing to it are big achievements such as taking cities. No details are provided about those, only the fact that they happened. That's what I thought. It wasn't shocking by any stretch of the imagination, but the criers only told people what they wanted to hear. Davy's dealings with the merchants and citizens along the way to the Draconic Kingdom were also generally fruitless when it came to information from the west. Let's head back to the wharf, he said. An official there should give me the answer that I'm looking for. What about our accommodations? Davy asked. We're probably not going to find any, Soraka answered. Not in the city, at least. We can sleep in the boat or camp at a nice location along the river. Back at the wharf, he wove his way through the crowds to speak to a bored-looking bar warrior overseeing the waterfront. His stripes had a pattern distinct to Western Roland Gork, and Soraka committed its nuances to memory. Excuse me, he asked. Where do we go from here? The warrior gave him half a glance. You keep going, he said. The lands around this city have already been partitioned between the tribes that came first. How much further? That changes from day to day. Just follow the Roland Gork and you'll eventually get where you need to go. Are there any humans still around? I highly recommend that you stick to the river, the official replied. The tribes that have settled here won't tolerate any trespassing. The official's pointed warning suggested that any of the subjugated human population had been placed out of reach of the stream of migrants. He thanked the warrior and they left the wharf, going west down a paved highway that followed the river. On the way, they crossed Kasturi and the other members of his house guard that went to find a spot for the boat. How far is our ship? Soraka asked. 3 kilometers downriver, the Gladestalker answered. I take it we're not staying in the city? Nope. Ranadratha's officials are directing migrant traffic further west. This whole thing's starting to stink, Jirika grumbled. I hate to say it, Soraka said, but it's a valid tactic. No less valid than any tribal migration. I'm not talking about that part, the Inquisitor said. I don't get any of the parts, Shawk said. What are you talking about? Soraka looked around for migrants before gesturing for Shawk to walk beside him. Ranadratha's campaign in the Draconic Kingdom has been purposely calculated, he said. A rumor shielded the Draconic Kingdom from any major invasions for generations. Ranadratha could have probably revealed this earlier than he did, but he only did so when he was ready to move with his clan. Uprooting a clan is no small undertaking, and it was only because it was relatively small that he was probably able to do it at all. Because a small warrior clan can't deal with an entire human kingdom like this one, he needed to bulk up his army. To do this, he attracted migrants from Roland Gork, who are sufficiently strong and numerous enough for his purposes. In short, the migrants were battle fodder used to grind down the Draconic Kingdom's resistance. Since they would have starved or lived meager lives in Roland Gork, one could argue that they were better off risking their lives for a better future. That was, in essence, what migrations were. And then we get to the scummy part, Jirika said. Shawk furrowed her brow at the Inquisitor's words, looking up at Soraka with a question on her face. He sighed and cleared his throat. Right. I suppose there are 2 scummy aspects, though that depends on how you look at it. That officer back at the wharf mentioned that the land had already been partitioned and claimed. It stands to reason that those who joined Ranadratha early or invested in his efforts somehow have been granted those territories. That process will repeat itself as he conquers more lands, and the migrants coming into the Draconic Kingdom can only head west to unclaimed lands. The migrants are used to the big clans running things back in Roland Gork, so that notion is carried into the Draconic Kingdom. I'm not sure what his long-term plans are, but without a major warrior clan to challenge him, Ranadratha becomes the de facto ruler here. People like Jirika didn't like these types of arrangements since they tended to exploit the poorer members of society. Since Ranadratha was the one who laid all the groundwork and acted to seize the opportunity, however, one could say that the only thing that differentiated it from any other venture of this type was the scale and lack of transparency. They returned to their barge shortly after sunset and decided to continue journeying through the night. The vague notion that he had forgotten to ask about something important drifted through his thoughts just as sleep fell over him. 5th day, Lower water month, 0 CE.
Keep going, the bar official said. The lands here have already been claimed.
I see.
Thank you.
Soraka pushed off from the wharf and returned to his seat. The wind and the steady splashing of the barge's paddle wheels were the only sounds that accompanied them as they left yet another town on their journey down the Roland Gork. They were now roughly 60 kilometers west of Eastwatch, but their situation as migrants hadn't changed. What did change, however, was the scenery. The uncultivated meadows along the border gave way to fields, vineyards and orchards that stretched out around them as far as the eye could see. Human lands are weird, Shawk said. Why is everything so straight? Their trails are straight and all of the buildings have straight edges. This valley is filled with straight rows of plants and trees. What are those, anyway? It's agriculture, Soraka replied. The humans here are not pastoral, but agrarian. Their tribes have settled permanently in favor of a more stable source of food that can support a larger population. So like what Elder Potley is doing? Growing fungus in the city. In essence, yes, Soraka nodded. Transitioning to this sort of lifestyle brings many changes. Territory becomes easier to defend. Resources and energy that pastoralism demands of a people can be invested in other things. Productivity and prosperity increase and the resulting innovations bring further change. But even after all that, Shawk said, they still lost. Soraka chuffed in amusement. Yes, they still lost, he said. While it isn't everything, strength is required to protect what one builds. Without it, others can simply steal it away, just like you see here. The humans here have more knowledge than your people, but knowledge is not power. Knowing what the problem is doesn't mean that one can come up with an answer, and, even if one knows the answer, it doesn't mean that they can enact it. He looked out at the untended landscape. The fields were fallow and the vineyards were growing wild, though the orchards needed little prompting to display their spring blossoms. In the case of the Draconic Kingdom, he continued, Roland Gork is simply too huge to fight. Even with the warrior clans focused on the defense of other frontiers, the excess population being sent west was more than enough to overwhelm the human defenders. If this agriculture will make us as weak as these humans, Shawk said, then I should stop what Elder Potley is doing. There's no point to it if others will just steal what we have or destroy it. Well, that's why I advised you to do those other things alongside your agricultural development. Your civilian castes will probably end up physically weaker than they are now because they can focus entirely on their civilian vocations, but your warrior and mystic castes will become much stronger when they no longer have to rely on hunting and daily responsibilities for training. So we'll become stronger than the other warrior clans? How should I put it? Within the same race, clans that see intense fighting are generally much stronger than ones that only rely on training, but attrition rates are high and much is lost along the way. Clans that see lighter conflict tend to be weaker than one that constantly trains. Clans that have the opportunity to formally train their warriors, put the training to the test and constantly incorporate their experiences into their training end up with strong, well-developed forces. The difference between them and other clans can be stark. Your warrior caste has a system where the warrior clans of the interior participate in a rotation that helps out with border security. Volunteering to join them once your clan grows strong enough should allow you to make good use of your training in the city and further build up your clan's strength. Shawk nodded thoughtfully. She probably understood what she needed to do for her clan's survival until then. If her clan could grow strong enough to assume border defense duties, one of the major obstacles facing them would likely be addressed. They would go from an upstart clan using dubious methods to gain economic advantages to an officially recognized warrior clan contributing to the collective security of Roland Gork. Their greatest political threat would flip to become a group of allies. With what was going on in the East, the rise of a powerful warrior clan was something that would be sorely needed and openly welcomed. Shouldn't the humans know about all of that? Shawk asked. It's one thing to not know because I've never seen anything like it before, but they've been doing it for at least as long as it takes to create all this agriculture around us. You say that humans are like the monkeys that we hunt above the city, except they don't have tails. Those monkeys can be pretty strong. Some of them even cast magic. Well, I didn't intend to make a serious comparison between humans and those monkeys that your people hunt. It was just a rough reference for their appearance. Humans aren't like beasts, never mind magical beasts. Even after they mature to adulthood, They're weak and don't usually get much stronger, but they're a very versatile race as a whole, especially when it comes to civilian vocations and fields of magic.
So you have humans in the Beastman Confederacy? While we're called that, the Beastman Confederacy hasn't been exclusively beastmen for centuries. Humans are part of the population too, of course. Like most civilized places, one has the protection of the laws that they are entitled to so long as one obeys the law.
Shawk fell into deep thought, remaining silent as they continued down the river.
The new sights and possibilities that they represented would give her much to consider, which was a major part of the reason why Soraka invited her to join them. Her clan's efforts in the city would yield excess resources that would best be put to use pursuing productive ends, and the Draconic Kingdom conveniently provided instructive examples that she could see in person. He didn't expect her to blindly embrace everything that she was exposed to, but he hoped that time would see Shawk and her clan act as a force that helped to drag Rolengork out of the primitive quagmire it was stuck in. The next pair of towns straddled the mouth of the river as it widened into a modest lake. Several other rivers fed into the body of water, which looked less than 10 kilometers wide.
I see a city on the horizon in the west. Kasturi shaded her eyes with a paw.
20 kilometers distant.
Soraka eyed the two towns. They didn't look much different from the previous ones, so there probably wasn't much to see.
Let's head straight there, he said.
The residents of these towns aren't very forthcoming with information, not to mention they're occupied with beastmen who have no idea what they're sitting on.
While the broken dam in Shawk's territory was a sign of the tragedy that had befallen her people, seeing Rolengork's migrants blithely squatting on the Draconic Kingdom's infrastructure and industry was just annoying.
As the vague outline of the city resolved into walls, towers and numerous buildings raised on a rugged hill near the shore, he noted that the river traffic didn't grow crowded as it had with Eastwatch.
It looks like this city's a major port, Soraka said.
Maybe things will be a bit less chaotic.
I don't see many barges heading further down the river, Kasturi said.
Ranadratha's headquarters? Davy said.
The criers back before Eastwatch said they had conquered the lands around 8 cities so far, and this is only number 2. It's a reasonable guess, Soraka replied.
Shawk rose to her feet, peering intently at the city as if Ranadratha might conveniently appear.
Soraka smiled to himself. The Bar Warmaster was essentially a celebrity to the people of Rolengork, and he supposed that popular figures drew the same types of attention no matter where one was. Even if the city was Ranadratha's headquarters, however, Soraka doubted they'd find him there. Warmasters led their campaigns on or near the front lines, so it was likely that he was off conquering the rest of the Draconic Kingdom and not lounging about. That being said, the city did have the look of being a headquarters. The officials looked 2 or 3 degrees more officious, groups of warriors walked proudly up and down the wharf, and the people generally carried themselves with an air of importance.
Jiraka said. I guess we know where all the loot is ending up.
A look of horror crossed Davy's face. That bar looks like a quill beast got lost in my wardrobe.
It's,
fashion, I guess, Mitra said.
A chuckle escaped
Soraka's throat when he finally spotted the individual in question. A female bar had adorned herself in 7 colors of silk, but she clearly had no idea how to wear them. They weren't even tailored, they were whole bolts wrapped around her figure. The wind from the shore teased the strips of diaphanous fabric, making her look like a mummy that had rampaged through a dye factory. I think it looks pretty, Shawk said. Heads turned to level somewhat disgusted looks at the young Osalo, who cringed at the sudden attention. It seemed that savagery came in all forms. The wharves of the city were organized using the same system as Khorstarafi, and they quickly located a berth. An official arrived just as they finished disembarking. A barge of that class costs 2 silver per day to moor here, she said. Can you afford that? While the welcome sounded rude, the official didn't carry an air of hostility. The rate was also fairly cheap. With so many migrants coming in with nothing to their name, however, those unable to pay for harbor fees were probably common. Davy came forward and produced 2 silver trade coins, handing them over to the official. It's our first time here, Davy said. Where might we be able to find accommodations? Most merchants stay in the groves outside of the city walls, the official said. Visiting lords can state their business with the city administration inside the second wall. If you have any migrants amongst your passengers, the next city is where they'll receive their instructions. Except for the con. We're redirecting any con migrants south, so there's a place on the other side of this city for them to stay until then. The official went through a well-worn list of additional points before proceeding to the next berth. When she said groves, Davy's ear twitched. She meant copses, right? What's a copse? Shawk asked. They're those stands of trees you've seen dotting the countryside, Kawabaki answered. Many races cultivate them to provide fuel for fires or materials for carpentry and construction. She told me to go sleep in a woodlot, Davy said sourly. If Shawk doesn't know what it is, Soraka said, chances are that the official didn't, either. Besides, it's the closest thing to home that they have. His reasoning did little to mollify Davy, who stalked her way off of the pier. Arriving at a city and then being told to sleep in the trees outside was not something he could say had happened to them before. I wasn't certain about it in Eastwatch, Mitra said as they joined the flow of foot traffic on the wharf, but the architecture here is definitely influenced by the Sapphire Coast. While not exactly the same and mixed with other styles, the buildings did display the angular motifs and vaulted architecture of the Sapphire Coast. The walls of more substantial structures were not left bare, instead displaying a vivid variety of frescoes, carvings and mosaics. The largest buildings in the city were domed, creating the telltale skyline of the cities lining the Cerulean Way. So did the human population migrate here after the demon gods and bring civilization along with them? Some sort of archive or library might be able to answer that, Mitra said, but since these guys don't seem to have any idea of what anything here is, I'm half afraid Jirika was right about them burning books as fuel. They followed the city's main thoroughfare straight to the gates of the second wall. The warriors along the way sent curious looks at what must have been the odd combination of different individuals in Soraka's party, but they were clearly hesitant to question two lords with a full escort of warriors. After crossing under the iron portcullis of the gatehouse, he looked around for something that might be an administrative office. The clans usually do all their desk work in their holds, right? I think so, Kawabaki said. I've never seen anything like an office building in any of Rolengork's cities. Then I guess it should be that citadel? Or am I overlooking something again? It was the closest thing to the clan holds in the jungle cities. He stopped to ask one of the sentries along the way, who confirmed that a building in the front of the citadel complex was where they were supposed to be going. Just before they reached their destination, however, someone called out from the side. You. A brusque, female, voice pierced the air, one that lent an air of someone who cared little about who else might notice them. The warriors in the street reacted to the voice, but then quickly turned their attention elsewhere. Uh-oh. Please don't be me. Going by how everyone else behaved, it was someone annoying, but somehow immune to any consequences of their behavior. Soraka picked up his pace. The voice sounded from closer behind him. You're not from Rolengork, are you? Exclamation mark at #%#. Soraka didn't break stride, but the warriors nearby moved to intercept them. With an exasperated sigh, he turned to the source of the voice, finding a smallish bar female with the same pattern of stripes as the warriors in the city. She stopped and leaned forward to scrutinize him. Yes, you and your companions are from elsewhere. Where might that be? How do you know we're from elsewhere? The female scoffed. I have traveled the length and breadth of Rolengork, and the patterns of your coats do not match any clan in the east or west or otherwise. Now, tell me, who are you? Did your parents not teach you any manners? Manners are irrelevant. Answer the question. He eyed the warriors that had surrounded them. His gaze rested on the most powerful-looking of the lot. Who is this person? He pointed a claw at the annoying female. Who am I? The female let out a laugh. I am the Guru Khhschlr. Never heard of you. Of course you wouldn't have. That's the point. Soraka turned to address the warriors again. Is she always like this? The warriors around them didn't answer, but their reactions were clear enough. Are travelers unwelcome in Rolengork? Soraka asked. Of course not. Khhschlr answered. They are most welcome. But we don't get very many, or any. Probably because you surround them like some sort of intruder the moment you notice. If you must know, we arrived from across the Great Loot. Stormport? I've been there. Bar don't live there. So that means, further? South? Southeast? From beyond the Cerulean Way? Sure, let's say that. So evasive,
Does that mean you're from the Confederacy? It must. KHHSCHLR brightened immensely and rushed forward. Leave, Mitra said. KHHSCHLR turned around and left.
That is not a bar, the Sharon muttered. That is a thing that makes inconvenient noises.
Mitra narrowed her eyes at the surrounding warriors, who prudently made themselves scarce. Let's get going before she comes back, Soraka said. Have you heard of that person before, Shork?
No, the Osalo replied. I only know about Ranadratha.
It's probably a good thing they don't talk about KHHSCHLR.
Probably.
The guru was so annoying that Soraka debated leaving the city behind without further investigation. Ultimately, however, his duties came first. He needed to develop a proper picture of what was going on in Rolengork, which included what they were doing in the Draconic Kingdom. The easiest way to get a sense of that was to observe the city that acted as Ranadratha's clanhold.
You, what did you do?
After 3 blocks, Soraka released another exasperated sigh. Was it a skill? KHHSCHLR asked. An ability?
It probably wasn't magic. It was your terrible manners, Mitra said.
Go away. Peace fell over them again as the guru wandered away. It was a nice city, really. A third wall, roughly 6 meters high, ringed the plateau at the top of the hill. The layout of the city suggested that, like many human cities, it was originally a fortified holding for a prominent tribe. Being placed in a strategically significant position also meant that it was in a logistically significant position. Thus, the local population grew around it for both security and economic advantage. Clan Torika's warriors grew more numerous the closer to the citadel they came, replacing the human defenders that likely manned the stronghold in the past. A pair of those warriors stopped them a block from the massive gate.
What's your business here?
An official at the wharf directed us to see the local administration.
Our leaders are busy at the moment, he said.
You'll have to come back another day. Please feel free to enjoy the rest of the city during your stay.
The warriors promptly returned to their posts.
Not much for bureaucracy, I guess.
Oh, you know what bureaucracy is.
Annoyed growls filled 24 throats. The warriors from before looked the other way.
Better us than them, eh?
It was evident that the guru wouldn't leave them alone and the local law enforcement wouldn't chase her off, so Soraka decided to make use of her. So there's nothing like that at all here? He asked. Not really, no, KHHSCHLR answered. The leadership comes up with instructions, and the people are expected to follow them. The rulers make up the rules for the ruled, and the warriors enforce the rules. The ruler is a warrior, by the way. Soraka wasn't sure if she was trying to be helpful or annoying, but there was little to be gained from lashing out in irritation. But what if there are disputes or issues to be amended? The lords handle that directly. But the lords can't handle everything. Not with an entire country to run. As much as bureaucrats were disparaged worldwide, they were essential to any civilization past a certain stage of development. That's what I told them. The guru cried, what I told him. But they saw no reason to change it. Too busy to unbusy themselves. Who is him? Why, the mighty War Master, of course. I still don't know who you are. Relative to everyone else. The guru stared at him for a long moment. Realization dawned upon her. I am the Guru KHHSCHLR, personal advisor to Maharanadratha. Maharana, I guess what's going on there is pretty clear. I am also occasionally his mate and an advisor to both the clan at large and the migrant population. I am not also occasionally their mate. That would be I get it, Soraka said. In that case, would it be possible for us to see Maharanadratha? One does not simply see the War Master, KHHSCHLR replied. He's not even here. Was there anything in particular that you wanted to see him about? Soraka considered his response, fearing that the wrong answer would permanently glue KHHSCHLR to his entourage. We came to see what the people in this part of the world were doing. How they live, what they've discovered, that sort of thing. We went to take a look at the East first, now we're here. The East, huh? A terrible business, that. His gaze sharpened at her response. Wait, you know what happened? The thing with the new Yeti Lord and the Oguans? KHHSCHLR replied, Of course I know. A decent con hunter from the warrior clans can cross all of Rolengork in less than 2 weeks. But it took much longer for information about Maharana Dretha's progress in the Draconic Kingdom to make it to the east. That's something else entirely, the guru waved a paw dismissively. Spectacle for the masses. Emergencies are treated differently. And without the slightest ripple in their civilian population. The separation between the warrior caste and everyone else was more substantial than he had initially thought. Not even rumors leaked out. But the developments in the East only mean that we here in the West must work harder for the sake of our confederation. KHHSCHLR's voice firmed with conviction. We still have time to turn things around. Turn things around. Did that mean something more had happened since they left the Yorguland frontier? Since you're here to observe, the guru continued, was there anything I could show you? We have made many great strides in the Draconic Kingdom. Anything? Well, perhaps not anything, but there is much that I'd be proud to display. New ideas, new technology and spellcraft, that's what you're here for, yes? After my own experiences, I've developed a keen appreciation for that sort of thinking. Soraka exchanged looks with his 3 wives. Since there is much we wish to see, Davy said. Let us start with the market. If we see something of interest, we can go from there. A natural approach, I see, I see. KHHSCHLR stroked her jowls, I don't dislike that. Very well, to the markets. The guru spun on her heel, pointed a claw back down the hill, and strode off with her tail raised proudly. She stopped when she realized no one was following her. Is something the matter? Nothing, Soraka said. Lead the way. They traced their path back through the city. Thankfully, KHHSCHLR's arm grew weary after a few blocks and she stopped pointing the way forward. Several minutes after leaving the main thoroughfare, the scents in the air indicated a nearby market. So do all of the spoils of the conquest go through this city? Soraka asked. All of the spoils to be shipped east, yes. It would be impossible to collect tribute otherwise. What percentage does your clan lay claim to? Early on, KHHSCHLR replied, nearly all of it. We did all of the fighting back then, after all. After the Draconic Kingdom's warrior and mystic castes were broken, we lowered the rates to 1/3 and let the migrants carve out their new territories with our assistance where it was warranted. Do the migrants even know what's valuable and what isn't here? We have a trick for that, KHHSCHLR replied. Rather than educating every single migrant about the value of human goods, I instructed them to rely on merchants to appraise their plunder. There were always merchants around, so it felt like a good, practical solution in their circumstances. Provided the merchants didn't cheat the tribes, of course. How do you deal with smuggling? Jiraka asked. What's that? KHHSCHLR asked back. Never mind. Forget I mentioned it. With the rigid tribal customs of Rolengork, smuggling may have genuinely been unthinkable. The street opened up into a stone plaza filled with colorful merchant stands. Judging by the merchandise on display, KHHSCHLR had chosen an upper-class location. Many of the goods on display here aren't exported to Rolengork, Davy noted. The merchants sort everything out, the guru replied. If I have it right, they consider Stormport to be the more lucrative market for the Draconic Kingdom's goods. The missing goods you've noted are shipped there directly. It will take time for the people back home to develop an appreciation for what we find here. Wouldn't there be a demand for tools? Davy asked. Many of them can be used in Rolengork's industries. The tools are needed here. We have a limited supply of them, after all. Soraka's brow furrowed as he examined a table arrayed with curved swords. Did that mean the Draconic Kingdom imported its metalwork from elsewhere? That didn't seem right, given what they had seen of the urban centers thus far. Halfway across the plaza, the old scent of humans turned into a fresh one. He stopped before they reached the opposite end. Mommy, I want that one. Another young female. You're getting so spoiled, we'll take that one. Tubar went to pick up a wooden cage from a long row of identical ones. Within each cage was a human lacking in any adornment or care. No, the human clutched the bars of her cage. No, 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 no. Let me go. I don't want this. Please. The bar cub's delighted laughter followed the woman's increasingly terrified shrieks, which could be heard long after the family left the market. "You're interested in the humans, I see," KHHSCHLR said. "Well, they do say that good cuisine knows no borders. Very well, I will show you how the product goes from farm to market." Soraka sighed as he dropped a platinum trade coin into Jaraka's waiting paw.